I'm sitting here before you. Well, actually only half of that is true, because yes, I am sitting here, but I'm not before you. I mean, I'm looking at a camera, you guys are looking at a screen, so I'm not actually doing any, well, yeah, like I said, only halfway is true because I'm just sitting. But regardless, what I'm going to be doing here is trying to convince you guys that zombies should be easier and simpler. And this is something that I had actually thought about for a little bit now. That's a lie, because I just thought about it last night while I was laying down. But regardless, I kind of want to explain why I think that this should be the case, that zombies should be easier and simpler. Now, make one thing absolutely clear at the start of this video is, when I'm saying I want zombies to be easier and simpler, I am not talking about the general or normal gameplay of zombies. I guess the gameplay that you experience every single time. I'm not saying that you should have like free perks as you get in, you should be able to buy 50 billion perks, or the zombies should be slower or weaker. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm asking for is that the setups and Easter eggs should be easier and simpler inside zombies. Now, the simpler and easier part completely apply to the setups of every single zombie map, but the simpler part, I do think, yes, Easter eggs should be simpler, but to an extent, and I'll get into that later, but I do also believe that they should also be easier. But the Easter eggs are a little bit more complicated, so I'll get to that later in the video. But for now, I want to talk about the more important one, and that's the setup of every single zombies map. And I think the best example to actually look at is Dead of the Night, because I think it's by far the worst offender, and it actually shines a spotlight on one of the bigger problems in zombies that really hasn't been brought up really at all until this map came up. What am I actually talking about? Of course, if it's relating to the setup, I think we all know where I'm going with this, but it has to do with how many things you have to memorize just to get set up in Dead of the Night. It's actually ridiculous. I mean, actually think about, just without thinking about the randomized spawn locations, just alone, think about how many things you have to get ready or get done to actually just play the map. I mean, just to play the map casually. And when I say play the map casually, I'm just saying, like, have the map open, and of course, having your perks, Pack-a-Punch, and in the Dead of the Night's case, silver bullets, because those are pretty important. But just to have that all done, you need to memorize, and I kid you not, this is actually the amount of spots you have to memorize just to have this map set up. You have to memorize exactly 50 different randomized spawn locations to be set up in Dead of the Night. And that's ridiculous, and I just cannot believe that this was an oversight by Treyarch, but at the same time, it was an oversight by me also. And I actually want to share this short story with you real quick, because this is something I actually had to be enlightened about, surprisingly, because the thing is, when I played Dead of the Night, I thought this was by far the easiest map we got inside Black Ops 4, and that's true to an extent, but that only extends to the Easter egg. The general gameplay and setup of Dead of the Night is ridiculously difficult, because it doesn't matter if the Easter egg is easy and the high rounds are easy. What is important is just setting up for the casual audience, and me as a hardcore player, I think it's safe to say that would kind of overlook this, because when I am just so used to doing difficult things in zombies, it's easy for me to overlook something as overly complicated as a setup. And this is something that had to be enlightened to me by a Johnny J25 video of how much of a pain this is for a casual audience, because you have to memorize 50 different spawn locations. And even as a hardcore player, I mean, I don't have them all memorized, and I always have to have a guide just ready for me just to be set up in this map. I mean, I memorize most of them, but at the same time, there's just way too much to memorize in the first place. So it's just a thing that I do not understand how Treyarch overlooked, and it just doesn't make sense to me, because I try to think of the reasons why they would do this. Why would you add so many randomized spawn locations? And the only thing I come up with is that they're challenging the, I guess, I don't know, the hardcore audience to say, hey, you're not going to find it this game, you better have that guide. I mean, got you that time. And it's all like, is that really worth it? I mean, to just say I got you to your hardcore audience, or to make it complicated for them every single game they play, is that really worth it? I mean, honestly, if you really think about it, they're alienating the majority of their fan base by doing this, because obviously, by definition, the hardcore audience is going to memorize or at least have a guide constantly with them when they are playing maps to know all the locations. That's obviously just by their name. I mean, that's by definition, they're a hardcore player, so they're going to have these things prepared. But they don't, I mean, how could Treyarch forget that the majority of their fan base is casual? And they completely ignore that. They completely ignore that the casual audience is not going to memorize 50 different spawn locations or possible spawn locations. That is just way too much to ask for a casual audience, and I would even argue it's way too much to ask from a hardcore audience, to be completely honest, because a hardcore audience still has to memorize not only those 50 things, but they also have to memorize all the Easter egg stuff that is just ridiculous. And I mean, most Easter eggs I could do without a guide, but this is one that I personally can't, even if I've done it so many times already. But regardless, my point is, and if you guys are going to remember one thing, and this is the main point I'm trying to make with this video, that Treyarch has to remember that, again, their casual audience is the majority of their audience, and when they go ahead and make 50 different spawn locations, they're not going to memorize this. And the thing is, when they added these 50 different spawn locations, we have to assume that this was directed towards a hardcore audience. And the thing is, the hardcore audience will memorize the 50 spawns, or again, they'll find or keep a guide with them, but they will, let's just say, memorize all these different spawns because by definition they're a hardcore player. And they would also memorize if they're only like, I don't know, 12 different spawn locations that you have to look for. But it doesn't apply to the casual, because the hardcore are fine either way. I mean, they'll get annoyed one way, but they're really fine either way. They'll play the map regardless. But the casual audience is completely different. The casual audience is willing to play a map where they have to memorize 12 different locations compared to having to remember 50 different locations. And by doing that, you are just the casual audience is going to look at that and say, what the heck am I going to waste my time doing that? I sat down and play a game for fun, not to go ahead and play memory. And it's just like, what are they doing? I mean, it's just such a huge oversight by Treyarch to ignore that. Just because they wanted to say gotcha to the hardcore audience, they ignored the casual audience, or the majority of their audience, and now they can't even enjoy the map Dead of the Night like I can, when I know it's a good map, but it's just so hard to enjoy because there's so many different locations just to memorize, to get set up. And again, that's not even talking about the wonder weapon, the Easter egg. I mean, there's just way too many things to memorize inside Dead of the Night, and it's probably the worst offender of this randomized locations that they have. But now I want to talk about Easter eggs, because I think everyone, for the most part, should agree with me for the first part that we should have easier and simpler setups. I think most people just say, well, obviously. But Easter eggs, on the other hand, people may not agree with me nearly as much. And the thing is, I don't think Easter eggs should be simpler, but I think they should be simpler to, again, an extent, but I do not think they should be as difficult as they are. And I want to bring into the spotlight a map that people like, that I just personally don't understand why people don't like, because I've seen this problem with this Easter egg for so long, but so many people will continue to praise this map for so many different reasons. And I don't get the praise for the Easter egg, because I think it has a really bad Easter egg in my personal opinion. I kind of want to explain why that is the case. But of course, I'm talking about 9 here. And I know a lot of people like that map. I don't understand it personally. If someone wants to explain to me why they like that map so much, I'd love to hear, because I don't get it. I think it's just a big old ball of okay, if you ask me. But let me explain the problem with this map, because this map makes it difficult for no reason. They make their Easter egg overly difficult for no reason at all. And this has to do with the structure of the Easter egg, because in many other Easter eggs before and even after it, it didn't really matter the order that you would really do the steps in. I mean, for the most part, you could be working on different steps at the same time, or you could be working on different things and different times entirely. And the example of Dead of the Night's Easter egg, because you could be doing the 3 different, I guess, crystal things that you have to do for the Easter egg. You do those in any order you want. But that's not how it works inside 9. You have to do 4 appeasing god steps, and you have to do them in a very specific order. You have to do Danu, Ra, then I think Zeus, then Odin. Hopefully that's correct order. You have to do it in that very specific order, and I see that as a problem, because I think that Easter egg would be so much better if you could do them in any order you want, because the problem lies with the Danu step, that is the first one you have to do. because the Danu step, you can't even start till round 18. That's the earliest possible time you could start for it. And I just don't understand why they would make it this way, because all you're doing is just making it really difficult on your casual audience to even attempt this Easter egg. I mean, how many casual players can even start to attempt an Easter egg if they can't even start it till round 18? And that's assuming they don't mess up, because, I mean, they're casuals, so they're probably going to mess up, so they're probably not even going to start the Easter egg to like the mid-20s to late 20s. It's just way too high of a round for a casual audience to be working on Easter egg steps, and that's just the first step. They still have to do not only the Danu step, but they still have the Ra, Zeus, and Odin step to do after that, and this is going to leave them doing the Easter egg on round 30, and how many casual zombie players even get to round 30, let alone can do an Easter egg on round 30? And this is just a part where it's made more artificially difficult for no reason. In what way does this help the gameplay experience to do these Easter eggs on higher rounds? I mean, all it does is just make it a very strict path to walk down, and you have to only take that path, which is something that Treyarch didn't do. I mean, you think about all their other Easter eggs, you could really do their Easter eggs in almost any order you want. You think back to Zetsubo no Shima, you didn't have to get the cogs in a certain order. You get them in whichever order that it just came to you as, whichever order you want, that it was easier at that time, or whichever order you wanted to. And that's just something I don't get why 9 made the mistake of, that just they went and made it just where they force you to do the most difficult, or I guess the one that takes the longest to do first. And it's just like, well, I guess I'm going to do the Easter egg on round 30 now, and it just really takes away the experience of the Easter eggs for every casual audience. And this is why I never understood why they do this, because in my personal opinion, I think Easter eggs should be able to done as early as you possibly can and as late as you possibly can, and even in the middle, everywhere. I think Easter egg steps could be done almost on every round. Of course, I'm not saying you should be able to do the Easter eggs all in round 1. Obviously, I mean there are some Easter eggs you could do that on, but for the most part, most of them you can't. So I'm just saying that they should be able to be done on early rounds. You should be able to optimize your game to make it to be able to do the Easter eggs on the earliest rounds possible. And that's something I really like about it, because it gives some variety in how you do the Easter egg, because there's different strategies to do the Easter egg in whichever way. I mean, if you don't want to deal with really hard zombies to deal with in the boss fight, you could try to do the Easter egg as early as possible. But if you just want to do it as fast as possible, you could just be flying through the rounds to do it as fast as possible. If you want to make it really difficult on yourself, you could do it on the higher rounds. And this is why I personally like Dead of the Nights, and I guess the Rising Drake, Zetsubo no Shima, and so many other Easter eggs, because it doesn't really matter the round. But for some reason, in many of the other Easter eggs, like I guess Blood of the Dead, I would even say Voyage, and 9, they make this mistake that it's just like, why did you do this? This is just making it difficult and alienating your casual audience, because back to the exact same thing I said about the randomized spot locations that are overly complicated, but this is overly difficult because the casual audience, first off, if they can't get past the setup that is overly complicated, they're not even trying the Easter egg. But assuming that there's at least a decent, I guess, setup for the Easter egg or the map, then they could start working on the Easter egg. I mean, you think about it from their perspective, I mean, at least they could start to try to get into Easter eggs on maps like the Rising Drake. Even if they're not good enough to beat them initially, they can work on getting better, because just imagine it like this. Think about it, because a hardcore audience is going to do it if they could do it on earlier rounds or later rounds. It doesn't matter to them. But to a casual audience, they have to be able to try to do it as early as possible, because for a map like the Rising Drake is a really good example, because they could keep trying, even if they're not good at zombies at first, they could keep trying and feel like they made a little bit more progress every single time, and then they could continue to get better at zombies. And this is why the Rising Drake is one of the most loved maps of all time, because you could optimize it to be as easy as possible, and then they could start working and getting farther on the Easter egg every single time until they become a better zombies player. And that's what I really liked about the Rising Drake, but we are really lacking inside Black Ops 4. We don't have something like that, and every single map has its issue why it's not like that, because first it may be the setup like in Dead of the Night's case, but for the rest of them, it's just the Easter egg is just like, why do I have to do this on such a high round? There's no reason I need to be doing these steps on such a high round. The only reason you did that is because you wanted to make the Easter egg more difficult. And of course, this is talking about another fundamental problem with Black Ops 4, because the zombies die after 10 minutes, so you can't really hold a zombie doing all the Easter egg steps as early as possible, which is another big problem with it. But you know, that's not really what I'm going to be talking about here, but this is another one of those problems that, again, goes back to the same thing, because the hardcore audience is willing to do it on round 20, but the casual audience is not. But they are both willing to do it on the earlier rounds, and that's just a giant I guess oversight by Treyarch once again, and I just don't get it, because they saw how they struck gold with the Rise and the Rocket and so many other maps, but then they just forgot, I guess, and they showed up with Black Ops 4 making mistakes that you would think that they would know are mistakes, making setups overly complicated, making the Easter eggs overly difficult, and it just doesn't make sense to me why or how they're expecting to give us these maps and expect, I guess, a community to grow around it when it's overly difficult for a casual audience, and I just don't get that. But anyways, this video has been going on long enough. Hopefully I got my message across in this video, because it's kind of a hard one for me to put into words. It makes so much sense in my head, but it's just so hard for me to put into words. But pretty much what I'm trying to say with this is that you could do things that appeal to the casual and hardcore audience. Don't just do things that appeal to a single audience, because it just will end up just alienating the other one, and it just doesn't allow people to feel like they're making progress in their skill as a zombie player. It just doesn't give you that option, because the barrier is just so high that you can't even feel like you're making any progress, because you're not getting any farther every single time you play. And that's just a really big problem for me, because often trying to make your casual audience do a hardcore audience is just putting that barrier way too high, and you're just not letting them get over to that. But anyways, that's about it for me. I just need to be quiet already, and hopefully, again, I got my message across. But if you guys did enjoy this video, go ahead, do all the normal YouTube stuff, and especially if you guys really thought this was important and the message that should be spread out there, I'd very appreciate if you guys just share the video around, like the video, subscribe, and just comment and all that good stuff, just for this video could get out there. If, again, that's only if you guys agree with the message in this video, obviously. But anyways, I'm going to go, and I'll catch you guys in the next stream video or whatever it may be, but laters, guys.